Welcome to Story Ando. We are in Genoa, in the second half of the 15th century, in a Europe that was increasingly interested in the open sea and distant trade. It was here that Christopher Columbus was born, destined to profoundly impact the history of great geographical discoveries. His story is intertwined with the ambitions of the Iberian monarchies and the desire to reach the East via new sea routes. A man born into a mercantile background, thanks to his determination and vision, he would pave the way for a new world. But before his glory, his life was marked by humble origins and a long apprenticeship on the Mediterranean routes. Christopher Columbus was born in Genoa between August 26 and October 31, 1451, the eldest son of Domenico Colombo and Susanna Fontanarossa. The family, of modest means, was engaged in weaving and the wine and cheese trade. Columbus spent his childhood in the alleys of the Pretoria district, a city oriented towards the sea and its trade. Conflicting sources also place him in Cogolito, but the most reliable tradition links him to the house in Vico di Rito di Ponticello. From an early age, he showed an inclination for navigation and claimed to have sailed on a ship as early as age 14. Although he had no formal education, he learned notions of geography and cartography, especially from his brother Bartolomeo, who would accompany him on his future endeavors. In the 1470s, Christopher Columbus began to make his mark as a sailor. At 21, he joined the fleet of King René of Anjou to fight against Aragonese ships in the Mediterranean, gaining his first experience of naval warfare. He later devoted himself to maritime trade, working for influential Genoese families such as Centurione, Di Negro, Imperiali, and Spinola. He quickly earned the respect of his superiors, achieving the rank of vessel commander and learning Portuguese and Castilian, which were useful for trade. In 1473, he reached the island of Chios, Greece, where he remained for about a year, alternating voyages in the Aegean, along the coast of Portugal, and returning to Liguria. In 1476, he took part in an expedition to Flanders and England, but off Cape St. Vincent, the fleet was attacked by French privateers. Columbus escaped by landing in Lagos, Portugal, an event that changed the course of his life. After the attack he suffered off the coast of Portugal in 1476, Columbus settled in Lisbon, where his brother Bartholomew was already working as a cartographer. The city, a vital center of trade and ocean exploration, offered him new opportunities. He came into contact with sailors, merchants, and scholars discussing the unknown lands beyond the Atlantic, and became convinced that a continent existed beyond the Azores, identified as the Indies described by Marco Polo. To strengthen his ideas, he studied texts such as Pope Pius II's Historia Rerum Ubique Gestarum, Pierre Dies Imago Mundi, and especially Il Milione. Also crucial was the letter of the Florentine Paolo Toscanelli, who in 1474 had hypothesized a westward route, despite miscalculating the distances. In Lisbon, Columbus married Filipa Muniz Perestrello, the daughter of a navigator, and from the union was born Diego, his first legitimate son. His marriage to Filipa Muniz Perestrello introduced Columbus to the circle of Portuguese navigators. The Perestrello family possessed maps, journals, and knowledge of the Atlantic islands, particularly Madeira and Porto Santo. Columbus, having settled in that archipelago, began trading on his own, without much success, but found opportunities to explore ocean routes. He became fascinated by the finds arriving from the sea, such as unknown woods and reeds from the west, which he interpreted as signs of distant lands. His conviction that Asia could be reached by crossing the Atlantic grew stronger, fueled by his reading and the accounts of sailors. In 1483, he presented the project to King John II of Portugal, requesting funding for the expedition. The proposal, deemed risky by his advisors, was rejected. Shortly thereafter, Columbus lost his wife and, widowed with a young son, decided to leave Portugal and move to Castile. After the Portuguese king's refusal, Columbus found himself isolated. The death of his wife Filipa also deprived him of his ties to the Portuguese aristocracy. No longer rooted in Lisbon, in 1485 he left Portugal with his son Diego and reached Spain, settling in Seville with his sister-in-law Briolinger Moniz, married to the Florentine merchant Francesco Bardi. There he began seeking new support to carry out his enterprise, proposing the project to various nobles and businessmen, including the Duke of Medina Sidonia, who, however, failed to secure the support of the crown. Columbus also found shelter among the Franciscan friars of the convent of La Robida, near Palos de la Frontera. The friars, impressed by his determination, introduced him to influential figures at the Castilian court. This was the beginning of a journey that would lead him to meet Queen Isabella of Castile, a crucial figure in the future of his explorations. Having arrived in Castile, Columbus began to present his plan to reach the Indies by sailing westward. In 1486, he was introduced to Córdoba, where he met Beatriz Enriquez de Araña, with whom he had a second son, Fernando. That same year, he managed to secure an audience with Queen Isabella of Castile, though initially unsuccessfully. A commission of experts, led by Hernando de Talavera, confessor to the sovereigns, examined the proposal and deemed it impracticable, considering the distances involved too great. Despite the refusal, Columbus did not give up. He approached other European courts, including those of France and England, but without concrete results. Meanwhile, he continued to press ahead in Spain, thanks to the support of clergymen and advisors close to the sovereigns. In 1490, as the Reconquista was coming to an end, Queen Isabella once again took a serious interest in his plan, realizing its political and religious significance. In 1492, after the Reconquista had concluded with the fall of Granada, the sovereigns Ferdinand and Isabella once again summoned Columbus. After lengthy negotiations, the enterprise was approved, and on April 17 the capitulations of Santa Fe were signed. The document granted Columbus prestigious titles, Admiral of the Ocean Sea, Viceroy, and Governor of the Discovered Lands, with hereditary rights. He was also guaranteed a percentage of future trade. 2 million maravedis were allocated for preparations, a modest sum but sufficient thanks to the contributions of Genoese and Florentine merchants. 3 ships were equipped in Palos de la Frontera, the Santa Maria, owned by Juan de la Cosa and chosen as the flagship, the Pinta and the Nina, entrusted to the brothers Martin and Vicente Pinthon. The crew, approximately 90 men, was recruited with difficulty, but the influence of the Pinzons ensured they had experienced sailors. The summer of that year marked the beginning of a journey that was destined to change the world. On August 3, 1492, the 3 ships sailed from Palos de la Frontera, heading for the Canary Islands to take advantage of favorable winds. While docked at La Gomera, the Pinta suffered serious damage to its rudder, which was repaired after weeks of work. The Nina was fitted with square sails, more suited to the ocean. Re-emerging on September 6, the crews faced weeks of open sea without sighting land. Columbus carefully recorded their progress, but reduced the distances in his logs to avoid fueling the sailors' discontent. They crossed the Sargasso Sea, covered with floating seaweed, a phenomenon Columbus interpreted as a sign of the proximity of the coast. On September 16, the magnetic declination was recorded, the compasses were deviating from true north, increasing the crew's fears. Tensions escalated to the point of mutiny, but Columbus managed to maintain discipline by promising that if land was not sighted within a few days, they would turn back. On the night between October 11 and 12, 1492, Rodrigo de Triana, a sailor on the Pinta, finally sighted the coast. Columbus, however, claimed for himself the prize promised to the first to spot land. At dawn, the 3 ships reached a coral island in the Bahamas, which the admiral named San Salvador. The indigenous Lucayos, belonging to the Taino people, welcomed the Spaniards with warmth and gifts, expressing surprise at their European weapons and clothing. Columbus described them as peaceful, unarmed, and very generous people, convinced that they could easily be converted to Christianity. He believed he had reached the East Indies and spoke of the islands as outposts of Asia. Continuing his exploration, he reached Cuba, which he considered part of Cathay, and Hispaniola, which he described as a fertile and promising land. Here he founded the first European settlement in the New World, called La Navidad, built with the wreckage of the Santa Maria, which ran aground on Christmas night. After landing at San Salvador, Columbus continued his voyage through the Caribbean islands. On October 28, 1492, he reached Cuba, which he described as the most beautiful island human eyes have ever seen, convinced he was looking at an outpost of the Asian continent. Moving east, he reached Hispaniola, now Haiti, and the Dominican Republic, where he noted fertile lands, waterways, and large populations. The natives told him of regions rich in gold, which Columbus identified with the fabled Sapongo, or Japan. On Christmas night, the Santa Maria ran aground on a coral reef and was lost. With the salvaged wood, a small fort was built, La Navidad, the first Spanish garrison in the New World, manned by 39 men. Columbus set sail again with the Niña and the Pinta, while Martin Alonso Pinzon, who had separated from the expedition, returned shortly thereafter. On January 5, 1493, the fleet reunited and set sail for Europe. The return was not without its challenges. In February 1493, the Niña and the Pinta were struck by a violent Atlantic storm that separated them for days. Columbus, fearing his own survival, entrusted the expedition's account to a barrel thrown into the sea. The Niña finally landed in the Azores, then reached Lisbon, where Columbus was received by King John II, who welcomed him courteously despite their old differences. In March of the same year, the admiral returned to Palas de la Frontera, an enthusiastic welcome. A few days later, he traveled to Barcelona, where Queens Ferdinand and Isabella received him with triumphal honors. Columbus presented gold, parrots, artifacts, and some indigenous people as proof of the new lands he had discovered. The courts celebrated the feat as a sign of divine protection and entrusted him with the task of organizing a new expedition. News of the discovery spread rapidly throughout Europe, fueling interest in those still unknown lands. On September 25, 1493, Columbus set sail from Cadiz on his second voyage, this time with 17 ships and approximately 1,200 men, including clerics, nobles, and colonists. The expedition had a clear purpose: to establish permanent settlements and begin the exploitation of resources. After touching Dominica and Puerto Rico, Columbus returned to Hispaniola, where he discovered that the fort of La Navidad had been destroyed and its men killed. To consolidate the Spanish presence, he founded a new colony, La Isabela, but the site proved unhealthy, food was scarce, disease was rampant, and many colonists died. Columbus attempted to explore the interior in search of gold, founding the fort of San Tomas, but encountered resistance from the indigenous populations. Tensions between colonists and natives, combined with internal dissension, undermined the admiral's authority. In 1496, Columbus decided to return to Spain, leaving a fragile situation that was destined to worsen. After 2 years in Castile, Columbus obtained permission to organize a new expedition. On May 30, 1498, he set out from Sanlúcar with 6 ships and approximately 300 men. 3 vessels were sent directly to Hispaniola, while Columbus, with the others, took a southern route. Arriving at Trinidad and the Gulf of Paria, he explored the coasts of present-day Venezuela, observing the vast Orinoco Delta. Upon seeing those lands, he believed he was not on an island, but on a new continent, although he could not fully comprehend its scope. When he reached Hispaniola, he found the colony in revolt, undermined by internal strife and conflicts with the natives. Francisco Roldan led the opposition to Columbus's authority. The tensions led the crown to send Francisco de Bobadilla with full powers. In 1500, the admiral and his brothers were arrested, accused of mismanagement, and sent back to Spain in chains. The sovereign's decision to send Francisco de Bobadilla to Hispaniola marked a turning point in Columbus's career. Arriving on the island in the summer of 1500, Bobadilla quickly assumed control, gathering testimony against the admiral and his brothers, accusing them of tyranny and mismanagement. Columbus, already weakened by the colony's hardships and the colonists' criticism, was arrested along with Bartolomeo and Diego. The three brothers were chained and boarded the Caravel Gorda for the return to Spain. When they reached Cadiz in late October, the scene profoundly shocked public opinion. The man who had opened the routes to a new world was returning as a prisoner. Queen Isabella, moved by his plight and his letters, ordered his release, but Columbus was forced to renounce his title as Viceroy of the new lands. Despite losing his title of Viceroy, Columbus was granted permission to undertake one final expedition. On May 9, 1502, he set sail from Cadiz with 4 ships and approximately 150 men, accompanied by his brother Bartolomé and his 13-year-old son Fernando. The goal was to find a passage to Asia through Central America. After narrowly avoiding a hurricane that destroyed much of Nicolás de Obando's fleet, Columbus sailed along the coasts of Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and finally Panama, where he sensed the existence of an isthmus connecting 2 oceans. However, constant rains, disease, and the hostility of some indigenous populations severely tested the men. In 1503, the worn-out ships ran aground in Jamaica, where the crew remained stranded for over a year, surviving on forced trade with the locals. Only in June 1504 did Columbus manage to return to Spain, marked by hardship and privations. His return from his final voyage left Columbus in precarious physical condition, and deprived of his former prestige. The Spanish monarchs, while acknowledging his merits, never restored his titles of Viceroy and Governor. He retired to Valladolid, where he continued to write memorials and letters in the hope of obtaining justice and recognition for himself and his sons Diego and Fernando. Sick and weakened, he spent his final years between lawsuits and bitter reflection. He died on May 20, 1506, without seeing the value of his discoveries fully recognized. His remains were transferred several times, from Valladolid to Seville, then to the Cathedral of Santo Domingo, and finally to Havana, until finally arriving back in Seville in the 20th century. His figure remained controversial even among his contemporaries, oscillating between the role of visionary and incompetent administrator. After his death, the image of Christopher Columbus endured centuries of interpretation. In the 16th and 17th centuries, he was celebrated as the man who opened the doors of the New World to Europe. However, despite the enormity of the undertaking, few lands initially bore his name. Only in 1819, with the creation of Colombia, was direct homage paid to his memory. His figure remains complex, a Genoese navigator in the service of Spain, a pioneer of the great geographical discoveries, but also a contested administrator responsible for initiating a colonial process that forever transformed the indigenous populations. Amerigo Vespucci, recognizing that those lands were not Asia but a new continent, gave the world the name America. Columbus thus remains a symbol of an epochal transition, in which the Middle Ages gave way to the modern age, opening avenues of exchange, conflict, and encounter between distant worlds.